Before there was a Nigeria, there were borders drawn in Berlin by men who had never set foot on African soil. There was a forest, and inside that forest, there was a fire that the British Empire, with all its massive guns and military columns and colonial proclamations, could not put out. This is the story of the Ekumeku. To understand the Ekumeku, you must first understand the Royal Niger Company and specifically why it chose Asaba. Asaba sits on the western bank of the mighty river Niger. It was, in the words of historians, a commercial crossroads, a town of considerable trade, of sophisticated political structures, of deep culture going back generations. In 1884, the Berlin Conference of European powers partitioned Africa among themselves without a single African voice in the room. Britain received the Niger territory, and the instrument of that domination would be the Royal Niger Company, a private mercantile firm granted a royal charter to trade and, crucially, to govern. The company signed treaties with local chiefs at Asaba, but as historian Professor Don C. Ohadike of Cornell University documented in his landmark 1991 study, these treaties were routinely coerced or misunderstood. The company did not come as a trading partner, it came as a sovereign power, with Asaba as its headquarters and seat of authority. The Royal Niger Company began extending its reach into the Asaba hinterland, into the Anioma communities of Western Igbo. They imposed trading monopolies, deciding who could sell, what could be sold, and at what price. They collected dues. They established native courts that stripped traditional councils of their judicial authority. Historian Philip Igbafe, writing in the Journal of African History, put it plainly: when the Royal Niger Company attempted to establish its authority in the Asaba hinterland in 1800s, it found communities that had long governed themselves and were not interested in being governed by anyone else. In 1888, the company bombed Asaba itself on the pretext of suppressing human sacrifice and the slave trade. The bombardment sent a clear message: resistance would be met with overwhelming force. But the Igbo on the western side of the river Niger had a different message in response, and they were already organizing. What emerged from the hinterland communities of Anioma was unlike anything the British had encountered in their conquest of the Nigerian South or anywhere else in Africa. They were called Ekumeku. The word, till today, remains difficult to be directly translated. Some scholars render it as the unseen or the indestructible force. Others note that it functioned as an injunction: don't speak about it. Historian Esther Nwabara also documented in her book The Story of Obolo Kingdom that the word Ekumeku describes secrecy. The very name encoded the movement's most powerful weapon: secrecy. The Ekumeku was not a standing army. It was not a traditional chieftaincy resistance. It was something altogether more sophisticated. A decentralized underground network of young warriors drawn from Otu Ikolobia the town clubs, the age-grade societies of Igbos in the west bank of the River Niger. Over 40 towns participated at various times, including the head town Ubuluku, Iseluku, Ogwashuku, Onitsha-Olona, Asaba, Ezi, Idumuju-Boko, Owa, Ibuzo, Obiaroko, and many more. Membership was bound by oaths of secrecy and spiritual invincibility. Fighters used masquerade disguises. They moved through the forests at night. They struck colonial outposts with hit-and-run tactics, then melted back into the bush before reinforcements could arrive. In Igboland, a century of contact with Britain, the military historian of the Owerri front describes how time and again British patrols launched surprise attacks on Ekumeku camps only for the chief or the ringleaders to escape. The camp at Olo was destroyed. The chief had gone. A midnight march at Aniogo was frustrated by thick darkness and roads lined with spiky bushes. The camp was raided. The remnants fled to Ohadike. Another attack was launched. The chief escaped again. This was not incompetence on the British side. This was the genius of the Ekumeku. Don C. Ohadike described it as an underground resistance movement operating in successive waves over 3 decades, reconstituting itself after every British expedition, absorbing losses and returning to the field stronger. The movement was also rooted in something the British fundamentally failed to understand: the deep communal solidarity of the Igbo people. This was not one chief's rebellion. This was a people's war, fought by all men. Enyitiaka Mbadetiaka. Between 1902 and 1910, the British launched a series of major military expeditions to destroy the Ekumeku. The records are preserved in Colonial Office files, now housed in London, and transcribed in painstaking detail by scholars like Professor S.N. Nwabara in Igboland. On the 1st of December 1902, the High Commissioner of Southern Nigeria authorized what became known as the Asaba Onitsha expedition. The force that left for the hinterland was formidable by colonial standards. Major Morehouse commanded. He carried a medium machine gun, artillery, 2 Maxim guns, over 150 rank-and-file soldiers of the Southern Nigerian Regiment, and 2004 carriers. Their stated objectives, as recorded in the Colonial Memorandum, were chilling in their specificity: to ensure the safety of the Royal Niger trade at Ogrugu, to bring under control all towns east of the Anambra River, where, in the language of the colonizer, human sacrifice, cannibalism, and twin killing still went on, to destroy the Oka Juju, to insist on the surrender of all guns, to feed off the land wherever active operations were being conducted. That last line deserves to be read again: to feed off the land. The people whose crops and livestock would feed this column had no say in the matter. The column proceeded through Onitsha-Olona, Ezi, Ogwashi, and across the Omambala River, meeting resistance, burning towns, demanding surrender. At Ezi, the town was burned down. At Upuma, the town was razed almost to the ground. From 28 January to 18 March 1905, the column visited nearly all towns, in the Oka-Owerri axis, official reports claimed there were only 3 incidents of serious resistance. But Professor S.N. Nwabara, the author of Igboland, A Century of Resistance, notes with scholarly skepticism that the report is silent on what became of the 10,284 rifles and the cap guns supposedly surrendered. One suspects the test concludes an exaggeration of the quantity of weapons taken. Then came 9th of June 1906, the killing of D.C. Crewe-Read. O.S. Crewe-Read was a district commissioner. He was on a visit to Ute in the Abo district, accompanied by an escort of 53 men. He stopped at Owa for the day. The town appeared deserted. 2 men came forward. Crewe-Read sent them to summon the townspeople. They returned late in the evening with a blunt message. The people refused to see him. What happened next unfolded with brutal speed. Police guards were fired upon. 2 policemen sent for help were stopped by the townspeople and their telegrams seized. With no hope of reinforcement, Crewe-Read began retreating towards Abo. He was ambushed near Owa-Aliosimini. He received 2 fatal gunshot wounds. His escorts scattered into the bush. The British government's response was swift and severe. An army under Captain Rudkin was dispatched to Abo. 2 European officers were seriously wounded. 2 soldiers were killed. 26 were wounded. A reinforcement column was pinned at Ute for 56 hours, with 30% of its 280 men suffering casualties. The Northern Nigerian Regiment was placed on standby alert. The colonial government framed the killing as the work of Ekumeku society, as anti-white, as savage, as atavistic. But the contemporary press told a different story. West Africa, a weekly paper, attributed the killing to the systematic humiliation of native chiefs by British administrators. Chiefs who had been flogged publicly before their own people for trivial offenses. The Lagos Standard accused the government of criminal indifference to the state of affairs in Abo. And E.D. Morel, the anti-imperialist journalist who had exposed atrocities in the Congo, wrote in the West African Mail that the event was simply the outcome of the resentment of a people against the overturning of all their traditions and feelings through gross and sheer administrative incompetence, not savagery, resentment. The word is important. No figure in Ekumeku Resistance is more compelling or more tragic than Chief Nzekwe. The British spent years hunting him through the forests of the Asaba hinterland. He was portrayed as the chief causing all the disaffection, the man being sought and fought by government. But as the text of Igboland makes clear, the truth came to light only gradually through a political officer named A. Nathan Harper, who arrived in April 1910 on instructions from the governor and spent days interviewing friendly Ogwashuku people. What Harper discovered inverted the entire colonial narrative. The government interpreter, one Mr. Rotilu, had been secretly relaying government intelligence to Chief Nzekwe while simultaneously blocking information about Nzekwe's whereabouts from reaching colonial officers. Chief Okonjo, who the government believed to be an ally, had in fact been using the soldiers against his personal enemy, Nzekwe, and blackmailing other chiefs with false accusations of disloyalty to the government. Remember, the people they refer here as chiefs are the kings or Obi of Ogwashuku. A brutal war had been fought on the basis of intelligence that was contaminated, weaponized, and fabricated. As the text records, the war began as a fight for the chieftaincy, Nzekwe and his followers versus Okonjo, the lawyer and the soldiers on the other. It has now degenerated into an Ekumeku rising. When Nzekwe finally surrendered on 27 May 1910 with his bodyguard of 200 men, he reportedly asked a remarkable question. Were the lawyers still in the camp? When told he was surrendering to the government and not to Okonjo, he became afraid because he then discovered he had been fighting the government, not his enemy. He had not wanted to fight against the government. He had been maneuvered into it. The political officer who dealt with Nzekwe's surrender wrote of him in glowing terms to the secretary of the southern provinces. He called Nzekwe a man of very great power in the district, someone to whom everyone kneeled in the salute, Agu, the lion. He wrote that Nzekwe had always been friendly to the government, had been driven into the war by Okonjo and the lawyers, and that his reinstatement as the king of Ogwashuku would be most satisfactory resolution of the difficulty in the region. Within days of the surrender, peace had been declared throughout the disturbed area. The lion of Ogwashuku had been brought low, not by British military might, but by the machinations of a colonial court system the British themselves had created. By 1911, the major phase of the Ekumeku Resistance had ended. Hundreds of fighters had been imprisoned. Leaders had been exiled to Calabar. 29 villages were fined. Native courts that had occasioned the rising were eventually suspended. But what had Britain actually accomplished? The distinguished historian, Professor Elizabeth Isichei, in her comprehensive work on Igbo history, situates the Ekumeku with a broader tradition of what she calls the people's response to British penetration, a response that was never simply passive, never simply accepting, and never simply defeated. Professor Philip Igbafe, whose 1971 article in the Journal of African History remains one of the foundational scholarly texts on the movement, shows that in spite of enduring consistency in opposing European rule, the Ekumeku was not investigated along related lines for decades, primarily because colonial historiography had no framework for understanding a leaderless, decentralized, spiritually rooted resistance movement. It simply did not fit the templates available to the conquerors. Professor Don C. Ohamike, whose 1991 monograph, The Ekumeku Movement, published by Ohio University Press, is still the definitive text, argued that the movement's true significance lay not just in its military activity, but in its role as a guardian of Anioma cultural identity in the face of a colonial system designed to dismantle it. The Ekumeku did not merely fight the British, it protected the social fabric, the age-grade societies, the traditional councils, the spiritual practices that held Western Igbo communities together. And here perhaps is the most important insight of all. The colonial records describe the Ekumeku as an anti-European club, a terrorist organization, a secret society devoted to murder and obstruct Europeans. But read those same records carefully. Read the dispatches, the patrol reports, the letters between officers, and what you actually find is a picture of communities pushed beyond endurance, pushed to their limit. Communities like Ubuluku, who stood against Benin Empire and defeated them. Communities whose markets were closed down by military action of Britain, who were fined for fighting a war they did not choose, who asked only to be allowed to sell their women to pay the fines imposed upon them for defending their own land. History does not always announce itself as heroism. Sometimes it looks like a man fleeing into the bush at night, evading a column of soldiers in the darkness, protecting something that cannot be surrendered, the right to exist on your own terms. The Ekumeku were not terrorists. They were the people who stood to protect their own land. The Ekumeku were people of honor, people of royalty, people of class, men of valor who could not surrender their land, who stood up to protect it. Their names were Obi Nwaje of Ubuluku, Nzekwe of Ogwashiukwu, Dunku Idegu Otokpuike of Ubuluku, Nwanoli the Noble of Ubuluku, Maya, Ikwa, Elumelu, Nwabuzo, Awuno. Say their names and be proud of them because they were our heroes. To honor the memory of Ekumeku, a school was named Ekumeku Grammar School in Ubuluku. Today, that school is called St. Anthony's College, Ubuluku, one of the first complete secondary schools in the western part of Igbo land. Also, another school was named after the woman of valor, Nwanole, who was then the noble who fought as a member of Ekumeku army. She is the woman after whom Nwanole Primary School, Ubuluku, was named. Another school was named after Idegu Otokpuike of Ubuluku. The school is today called Idegu Primary School of Ubuluku. These were Ekumeku heroes. In Asaba, a prominent junction in Asaba, Ekumeku roundabout, but gradually residents are beginning to change the name from Ekumeku to the name of the company that constructed it. You will hear them now saying Intabwa roundabout instead of Ekumeku. We must learn to honor the legacy of the heroes who fought for our land, who stood before us. Thank you for watching this documentary. If you enjoyed watching this video, please hit the subscribe button. Drop a comment down below. My name is Prince Onwodenim Ngozi Chukwuka Fortune, and I am a prince from Ubuluku Kingdom. See you in my subsequent videos. Bye.